Welcome everyone to Anthro Stories, an occasional series here in anthropology where we host folks who are working or who have studied in anthropology and hear the story that they have to tell. Today, we are excited to have some of our CRC alumni returning to talk to us today about what they've been up to, especially their experiences with learning during the pandemic. My name is Professor Amanda Paskey, and I am one of the anthropologists here at CRC, and I am going to be facilitating today's session. Before we get started, just want to talk about some housekeeping, and then we will do our CRC land acknowledgement, and then we will move on to our speakers introducing themselves. So if you could please mute yourself, and if you have a question, you can type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand or just ask it when we get to the end of the session during the question and answer period. We will have time for that at the end. Otherwise, I think that's all the business we need to take care of. So let's move on to our next slide here. So today we acknowledge the land currently occupied by Cosumnes River College as the traditional home of the Miwok and Nisseon people. These sovereign people have been caretakers of the area since time immemorial. The state of California is home to more than 110 federally recognized Indian tribes, representing the most diverse set of tribal nations anywhere in the United States. Despite centuries of genocide and occupation, the Miwok and Nisseon people continue as vibrant and resilient federally recognized tribes, bands, and rancherias. The waters of the Sacramento, American, and Cosumnes rivers have nourished Miwok and Nisseon tribal communities with cultural and dietary sustenance throughout time. Cosumnes of Cosumnes River derives from the Plains Miwok language, stemming from the words Cosumnes, meaning salmon, and umne, meaning the place of. It translates as the place of the salmon. Today, we celebrate our Miwok and Nisseon tribal neighbors as the ancestral stewards of this land and honor their sustained existence. It is with their blessings and continued guidance that Cosumnes River College seeks to provide an accessible, equitable, and principled institution of learning. I am now pleased to introduce all of you to our distinguished guests today, our CRC alumni, who will introduce themselves. So Ella, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ella Lockhart. My pronouns are she, her. I transferred from CRC to UC Berkeley in the fall of 2019, where I majored in anthropology. I concentrated my studies in archaeological methods, California archaeology, and I also took a lot of the classes for the geospatial technology minor. Outside of my classes, I was involved as an undergraduate researcher for the Bare Bones Community Archaeology Lab. We worked on a couple different community projects. One particular special one was a development guide for Sitka Paiute, which is a tribe in Northern California that I worked on with a team of undergraduates and a graduate student, and it was multidisciplinary. Because I transferred in the fall of 2019, it was in person for one semester, and then the rest of my semesters were all online. So I got to experience learning during COVID online. And then I graduated last year in 2021 in May. And I went right into grad school for an education master's, which was a great learning experience. There was a lot of gems that I got out of that. But ultimately I decided that it was not the career path that I saw myself in long-term. So I decided to leave that. And since then I have been doing a lot of career research and kind of diving deep into what I want to do next. And yeah, I'm kind of in the midst of job hunting.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I attended CRC from 2016 to 2018, and I transferred to UC Davis, where I got my bachelor's in evolutionary anthropology. I did a lot of undergraduate research, worked with many PhD students, along with lots of PIs, so Dr. Yelmer Erikins and Dr. Chris Darwin, and I performed stable isotopes on human remains from cemeteries in San Francisco. and I talked about their diets and their migration patterns, and was able to write my honors thesis, which was published in the SCA proceedings. I took a gap year after I graduated, and was employed in the Stable Isotope Lab at UC Davis. And I applied to graduate school, where I'm currently at. I began graduate studies at Sonoma State University in the fall of 2021, where I'm getting a master's in cultural resources management. And my area of focus and research continues to be historic era cemeteries in San Francisco, and talking about indigent and immigrant populations that have been buried there. And I'm also employed at the Anthropological Study Center as an archaeological technician, where I write a bunch of reports and do a lot of hiking and have a good time.
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Marcos Martinez, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a trained bioarchaeologist, having earned my AA at Cosumnes River College back in, oh gosh, it's 2013 now, and my BA in anthropology in 2015 at the University of California, Davis. After graduation, I worked for over 3 years as a cultural resource management contract archaeologist all throughout California and the Great Basin. And then in 2018, I received my MA from Arizona State, where I am currently working towards my PhD at the Center for Bioarchaeological Research. My research focuses on reconstructing the weaning process and early childhood diets to better understand changes in subsistence and foodways of the pre-Latine people of the Andes Mountains. And to address my research questions, I use techniques from both geology and chemistry, which is often referred to as archaeological chemistry, as well as bioarchaeology, which is broadly the study of archaeological human remains. In addition to my research, I'm also an adjunct lecturer at the anthropology department of Phoenix Community College. Go Bears, I think, is our mascot, hopefully.
It is wonderful to have all of you here. So for those of you who are watching, we've got a couple questions for our panelists, and we're just going to go around in round robin fashion, having them address it. So the first question is, what got you interested in anthropology? Did you always know you wanted to study anthropology?
So I'll go first. I did not always know that I wanted to study anthropology. I jumped majors so many times before I finally settled on anthro. I think I was social work first, and then I was social science broadly, and then I was political science, and then I was international relations. And then I took my first anthropology class, and I think it was fall of 2017. It was actually with Dr. Fortunato, Anthro 300. And I was just like, oh, this is it right here. This like blends together and brings together all of my favorite subjects and topics. And anthropology just gave it this like holistic lens, and I loved how it just dealt with all different like forms of evidence, and in ways that I had never really like encountered before. And I just really, really loved that. And then from there, getting involved in crawl and taking like intro to like archaeology and cultural anthropology. I was just in love with every anthropology class that I had taken. And yeah, since then, it's been history since that first class. And I think when I was trying to think of, okay, what's like a little highlighted experience of my whole journey of anthropology, and it's really hard to find one, because I think, and I would joke around and kind of say this to my other anthropology like classmates, like my favorite anthropologists are like the people that I meet in my classes. Like I just meet the coolest people in anthropology, and I like at CRC, and then after I had transferred, I was always so excited about taking a new class and meeting other anthropology majors, because they're just the coolest people. And that's a huge part of why I loved being an anthropology major.
Not to interrupt you, Nikki, but Ella, you mentioned crawl. Can you explain briefly for those people who don't know what that is, what crawl is?
Yeah, so crawl was the Cosumnes River Archaeological Working Lab. I hope I got each of those right. And it's a archaeology like working group that's at CRC, and it's a team of community college students that are working on a historic collection of like post-gold rush era. The site is actually on 2nd Street in Old Sacramento. So if you're familiar with that area, and basically we would, and Nikki did it as well. And I'm not sure if you did it too, Marcos, but usually there'd be about 4 to 6 of us. And I did it for a couple semesters, and it was a really great experience of getting really hands-on with archaeology as a complete newcomer, like not having any prior experience, just being interested was all that you really had. All that you really needed to do as like a qualification, and we got to work hands-on with artifacts and learn like the fundamentals of like artifact handling and analysis. So that's what crawl was.
That was so comprehensive. That was great. I also did not know that I was going to be landing in anthropology when I started at Cosumnes River. I was an international relations major, and after about a semester of taking political science classes, I hated the reading. I was done with the reading, and I took Dr. Paniakis's globalization class. And after the first lecture, I was like, I think anthropology is my field of study. And I too was involved with crawl, and that was an incredible experience because community colleges don't typically have the resources or the faculty members that want to devote time to have a research lab. So that was incredible experience that we were able to gain. But moving and transferring into UC Davis, you pick between a sociocultural anthropology track or you go into evolutionary anthropology, which are where the archaeologists usually go. But I didn't know in my first semester if I want to do socioculture or evolutionary. And after devoting a lot of time to doing research as an undergraduate in that first semester, I knew that archaeology was going to be my route. So I just kind of stuck with that and took every opportunity I have and talked to a lot of people about not only completing my degree, but what my prospects were after I graduated.
I'll continue this theme here, and I had no idea I was going to end up in anthropology. I came from one of those old-fashioned families that like you go to school to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, and anything else was superfluous. And I got into a few places out of high school, but didn't really know where I wanted to go. I wanted to work for a little while. I wanted to do the community college thing, and so I ended up going to most of my classes were at Cosumnes, but I also took a couple other throughout the Los Rios system. And so in my first year, I was really just focused on getting biology, chemistry, all of those requirements out of the way. And I don't know if it's still a program, but do we still have like the IGETC, the transfer programs and things? Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so the reason I actually took an anthropology class was because I sat with a counselor and they recommended, oh, like take a couple to like fulfill your social science requirements and then you can keep up with your other courses. And I believe my first course was ASM 300 as well, with Professor Paskey. And I have to agree with you, Ella. I think just sitting in that class, it was just the most wonderful realization of falling in love with something that was so holistic in its discussion of humanity. It just so many different theoretical backgrounds, so many different ways of approaching data, getting to talk about human beings that do not model and do not act in the ways that we think they would, but getting to use hard sciences to ask these questions. It ended up, I just ended up falling in love with it. And I ended up taking a bunch more classes. I ended up working in crawl as well. It had an amazing experience. And Professor Paskey actually wrote my letter for field school after working in crawl. She was my letter of recommendation. And if you are interested in anthropology, I would recommend taking a field school, as it is a great way to get some extra units, to get your hands dirty, both figuratively and literally, getting a feel for field work. There's both sociocultural and evolutionary-based field schools as well. And after that summer, I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
I'm going to throw you guys an unscripted question. I'm sorry about this. Do you have any, all of you have worked out in the field or in labs or in labs. So do any of you have any favorite stories or experiences in anthropology that you want to share? Maybe things that you never thought you'd experience or funny stories, anything?
I'll go first. So I had a lot of experience in lab work. I had almost 4 years of experience in lab work, but I'd never been out into the field until this past fall. And on my first survey, we were out in a state park up in North Bay, and there was a lot of barbed wire, and you can't see it because there's so many leaves. And I was within 5 minutes of my first survey, I tripped and fell about 10 feet and had to like MacGyver duct tape my hand because it was bleeding. And then I also had to crawl under like a bush to go through my transect, and I crawled through bear poop. So it was the most adventurous and just filled like first survey I could have ever experienced. There was a lot going on that day.
Sounds very memorable.
I love that story, Nikki. That is great. That is just like exactly what I would imagine like archaeologists would do, crawling through the bear poop. I have one that was kind of like a little like light bulb moment of like realization for me. It was in my second semester at Berkeley, and we were doing a project that was requiring like a lot of research of like manuscripts of early anthropologists. And I think sometimes, or really like before I got to this point, I just kind of assume that the work that they do is like, it's so thorough and they're so well researched, and they're like we idolize them, or just like previous scholars. And one that I was reading about in his book, it was Kroeber, who is the founder of the anthropology department at Berkeley. And in this book he had written, he had called it his like handbook of the California Indians, and it had 3 citations for the entire book, 2 of which were himself. And it just really made me think like, high school students today do more like peer-reviewed research than any of these dudes from 100 years ago. And that was just really like a wild moment of like, oh, but these are like these like experts that we look back at. I don't know. It was just that's one that I would like share with my students too. And I was teaching, and they were like, what? And I was like, you guys are doing more peer-reviewed research than some of these people from like 150 years ago would do. They would just have a thought in the bathtub and be like, this is a universal fact of humanity. Yeah, that's a little.
I would have to say one of my favorite things that it's a little hard to articulate, but it's something that just reminds me of how much I love what I do, is just every once in a while I'm like struck with the awe of the archaeological record, holding something or that very material feel of it. And I think of one of my favorite projects when I was working CRM was we were in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada, which is where Burning Man and things like that are. And we were doing excavations for a project. And I was combing through my unit, and I came across just the most perfectly intact Olivella shell bead. So an Olivella shell is a type of snail shell common to the Pacific Northwest, but we see it a lot in the archaeology of indigenous communities within California. We learn all about them. Well, we learned all about them in the, is CRC still teaching the native California or oh yeah, so I took that class as well. And it was just one of those beautiful moments where I saw this little bead that was thousands of years old, that had traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles from the coast through trade and travel. And I'm just really fortunate for moments like that. It reminds me of why I love what I do.
I love that you touched on everything from bear poop to bathtubs to shell beads. So this is great. You guys are a great group. All right, our next question. What was the most challenging thing about being in school during the pandemic? Were there also unique opportunities?
So I think in that first year in 2020, it was just like getting hit with a slew of like disappointment with everything being canceled. For me, I was gonna have my field school in that first summer, and it was canceled for that summer and the next summer. So there were these things, I went into, I'm gonna transfer, and then I have this plan laid out, and this is how it's gonna go. This is what I'm gonna do. And then everything moved online. So it took away like the in-person element, which I really loved. My lab that I was working with after we wrapped up our project went on indefinite hiatus until like just indefinite, and it never really like went back up while I was going to school there. And then yeah, field school got canceled, so it's just a lot in that first year that was definitely a big challenge. But then there was like a couple unique opportunities that came out of it because it was remote and virtual. I had to move around a little bit because of just like housing, but I had the opportunity to live in Denmark for a semester because it was virtual and asynchronous. So I didn't have to worry about the time zone. And while I was in Denmark, I actually went and like emailed some professors at University of Copenhagen about like sitting in on their master's like anthropology classes. And they were like, yeah, of course. So I got to go in person to anthropology classes in Denmark. That was a cool opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's really cool that you still got to get some of that study abroad experience during the pandemic. I was finishing up my last quarter at Davis when the pandemic started, so all my classes were online, and I feel like I'm a better student when I'm in the classroom, and I feel like I have a better communication skills when I'm conversing with people in person. So I greatly benefited when I transferred or when I started graduate school because my classes were in person, and I very much missed being in the classroom. So my seminars, my graduate seminars were in person, and I felt like I was getting that sense of, Socratic seminars or being in the classroom and talking with someone. But a unique opportunity is that I was hired by the Stable Isotope lab at UC Davis following my graduation, which wouldn't have happened if things were all up and running. Archaeologists and a lot of other researchers were considered essential workers, so we were in the lab almost every day. And I got hired under a National Science Foundation grant that the university had gotten. So that was also very unique. And I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity because I would have been maybe traveling and gallivanting elsewhere. So it was great to have that opportunity to work at the university.
I think for me, it was similar to what you had mentioned, Ella, that I think the initial shock and the acceptance of so many of the aspects of life that I was excited about. I was excited to defend my MA in person and spend the weekend partying with all of my cohort members and friends I'd made. I was excited to start field work right after I finished my MA, and all of those little things that end up getting put on hold were definitely some of the hardest parts of the pandemic. I think there was the adjustment period of all of us trying to figure out how to do everything socially distant. It was a very novel learning experience with a lot of challenges, but there were opportunities that did come of those challenges. And one of those was I had actually finished up my MA. And I don't know if it's the same for the Los Rios. I'm sure there's a lot of regional variation, but at the start of the pandemic, there was a very large increase in the Phoenix region of people coming back to school. So a lot of the community colleges saw a lot of higher levels of enrollment. And a lot of professors, especially some of the older professors who haven't had experience doing so, were struggling under developing online courses. And so there were a lot of calls that went out for folks. And because of that, I was able to get a position as an adjunct lecturer at Phoenix, where I've now taught and developed 2 courses, and After leaving the Los Rios system, I went to UC Davis as well. And then coming to ASU, it's been a lot of like R1 research institutions. And while research institutions are fantastic, their focus is not always on education and teaching. And so getting to immerse myself in both the virtual and real lecture halls has been something that I did not know that I would love as much as I do. And so I am very fortunate that an opportunity has arisen because of what came out of the pandemic.
I'm so pleased to hear that all of you had, a challenging time with the early days of the pandemic. You all found a silver lining to it. That's great. So has the pandemic changed how you look at education or careers or what interests you?
I think with this question, I'm still working on forming my answer to it, but then it's also like an answer to itself that like, I'm okay with that being like, it's going to be this ongoing, like, well, what does it mean? I'll be continually kind of reflecting on this one. And I think one of my biggest takeaways is just that it's kind of forced you because we were so much changed in how things were supposed to be that it really made you like sit back and think, well, why are things supposed to be this way? Or like, do I even want them to be this way? What is the relationship that I have between like my education and my career? Because but before pandemic, what I thought was going to be career was very different than what I think it was now. And the education is something that I see as like very ongoing. And no matter what, I always have my education and my bachelor's in anthropology. My career can really be anything. And I think that's one of the great things about anthropology is that it's relevant to everything, because in some capacity, any career in any job is going to be you're going to be working with people in some capacity. You will be working with them. And then I think one of the big things has been like, well, how important is my career to my identity? Because I actually think some of my more meaningful experiences with anthropology for myself personally have been even like outside of the lab or outside of the classroom. And it's just been in like the relationships and the friendships that I've made and just how I've like gone about in the world, like some of my hobbies and my interests. And anthropology is like very much tied into that, just as much as it is into like where I want to see myself in my career. So I guess to bring it back and make it a little bit more concise, just embracing that it's like nonlinear and it's not so black and white. And it's just going to be something that's perpetually kind of changing. And yeah, that.
Yeah, I think the pandemic actually highlighted a lot of the job security that is in cultural resources management or CRM, and the fact that they were constantly hiring throughout the pandemic. There weren't a lot of layoffs. There was still a lot of construction going on. And when there's a lot of construction going on, there's obviously a lot of archaeologists that need to be on hand. So I found that there was a lot of job security. Working in the lab at UC Davis, I didn't really feel like we were so much in like pandemic zone because I was in PPE all the time anyways. I was masked because I worked with chemicals and dust and was wearing glasses and gloves and a lab coat all the time. So I don't think I necessarily saw much of a change or a shift, especially in my line of work. But yeah, I have seen a lot of job security in archaeology.
To kind of go off of that, Nikki, I agree. It seems that the pandemic really showed the staying power of cultural resource management, how it was considered a priority throughout most of the pandemic. I know so many companies back home that were looking for people actively. Like I was getting calls being like, hey, do you have time to work part-time, or do you have any time to do report writing or something, just because there was a need for it, which was really interesting. I would say, I guess, in a little more of the abstracted sense, I found that the pandemic has not necessarily allowed, but I've learned to be a little bit more kind with myself, a little bit more kind with my students. So one of the things that really surprised me as both an adjunct lecturer and as a teaching assistant who's had years of working in the classroom is just how open students were during the pandemic and have continued to be since then, and about where they are with their mental health, where they are with family issues, with jobs, with things like that. And it was something that was really novel in that way. And I've just learned and really appreciated taking that forward in almost every aspect of both my career and life, is that just show a little more kindness, a little bit more openness to talk, give them that extension if they need it. You know, turning in an assignment late isn't the end of the world. And I think that, sorry, excuse me, the pandemic really helped me think about that way, both as a person and a lecturer.
Marcos, I love that. I think a lot of us at CRC have also noticed the vulnerability that our students have been sharing with us, and the empathy that is coming from us to them, as well as from them to us. And it's been comforting that we've all been in this together and we can all support each other together. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you on that. So do you all have any advice for today's community college students? Maybe even specifically Cosumnes River College students?
My advice is going to be take advantage of all of the opportunities that interest you, even if you feel like anxious about not being good enough or not being qualified. Jump out there and do it. Get outside of your comfort zone. With that being said, I really like this quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an author and a community activist. That's she says, like, your no makes way for your emphatic yes. So just as it's important to say yes to opportunities and things that you want to be a part of, it's also just as important to say no to the things you don't want to be doing, and to keep that in mind, and be ready for things to change, because they always do. And center the process and the journey over the destination, the result, because keep it flexible, because things will change.
Yeah, I think my educational journey has definitely not always been linear, but my biggest advice is to talk to as many people as you can, because you never know what opportunities they might be able to tell you about, or you never know, in a conversation with someone, they might say something that really strikes a light bulb and leads you on to your next adventure. I was recently writing a paper and I read someone's honors thesis that they had recently written. And I was like, I'm going to email them. I'm going to tell them what a great thesis it was, just because I want to say it was a great thesis. And we ended up having very similar research focuses. And I've been collaborating with them, and they're in Iowa. So you never know what opportunity is going to come your way. And I sometimes am a little hesitant to maybe go to a conference and walk up to someone and talk to them, but there's email, and email works great. And if you email a professor maybe at another university, and they're always going to want to talk about their research. I feel like professors and researchers in general love talking about their work, because they put so much effort and energy into what they do. So they're going to be open to talking about it with you. And never ever not ask questions. I ask so many questions, and sometimes I'm like, oh, it's going to be a little naive of me to ask this, but here it goes. And I just learned so much from it. So stay curious, because you never know what's going to come your way.
I would say all amazing points. So hopefully I'm not reiterating too much, but just feel comfortable in taking that course that is outside your wheelhouse, or something you've always wanted to try out. I mean, that's how I ended up in anthropology. I think having that flexibility, especially at a community college, is a really amazing resource. And take advantage of your professors in that way. Ask them about their interests, ask them about their own experiences. They are such amazing resources and wonderful forms of guidance. I mean, yeah, I know Dr. P isn't here right now, but for instance, like, my background in loving both the physical sciences, and then she's, well, my husband works at UC Davis and you should talk to him, and just finding those connections and taking time for yourself to explore new things you might be interested in, you're in the perfect spot to do that.
Such great advice. Thank you. So we are done with our formal program and we can open it up to any questions that anybody has. If you have a question, you can pop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and just ask away.
I'll ask you guys something. I started off in the university setting. Can you speak to how you felt about starting this career path in anthropology in a community college setting? Because I think when I think about students that come into community college, it's not always the path I imagined for them. And then you found yourself in this path where you would transfer into a university. But can you talk to me a little bit about like the community college experience specifically for you all? Thanks. And by the way, thanks everybody. If I don't have a chance to say so, really, it was a pleasure, especially seeing familiar faces, really.
Ella, did you want to go, or is it cool if I talk? Okay. I feel like community college really set the bar high in terms of what I was expecting from my instructors. So when you're at a community college, you get a lot of time with your professors. I had gotten a lot of time, mostly because I had taken advantage of a lot of office hours, but also because of crawl. And I got to work, one-on-one with professors and really get that teaching moment with them. And so when I transferred to Davis, I wanted nothing less. I didn't always want to meet with a grad student for office hours to talk about a paper. I wanted to go straight to the professor. And I'm so sorry not to discredit any graduate students, but it was because I'm also in that position now. But it was one of those things where I want to go talk to this professor who has created this lab, who has this wealth of knowledge, and I want to work beside them. And I feel like I really got that opportunity at Davis. And now talking with a lot of graduate students at Sonoma State, they're like, we barely got to meet with tenured professors. They barely knew our names, or we didn't get to work with a lot of graduate students. So it was setting the bar very high from the beginning to have that one-on-one with professors.
I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I think as someone who went from the community college and has now had multiple experiences at different R1 institutions, I've never had better mentors and teachers than when I was in the Los Rios system. And I truly believe that. The amount of efforts that professors put into the way they teach their courses and interacting with students and making those connections. Not to say that R1 professors don't do that, and there are so many that do that are great mentors. It's just that this isn't the primary push for a lot of them. The primary push is grant writing, is writing papers, is generating that stream of both revenue and academic materials as that is. So that was one of the hardest transitions for me, was from going from the community college perspective to one where even the most well-intentioned and best professors might be able to squeeze you in for a few minutes at a time here or there while they're running samples or something. And so I think that it is a particular strength of starting at a community college is really use that time with the professors.
Yeah, I mean, what you guys have said already about the accessibility to having your professors, that definitely, I mean, I noticed at Berkeley too, it was even said at the general meeting at the first week of school for everyone that was interested in being an undergraduate researcher, their UWAP program. They're like, you can apply as a freshman or sophomore, but you're not going to get it. This is basically for juniors and seniors. And that was something that, like, I had just come from community college where we already had all these student organizations and you could jump right into being involved in getting leadership. So it was kind of funky to be in a room full of like 400 people and they're like, don't even do the application, but you're not going to get any experience until you're an upperclassman. And that was kind of funky. I think another advantage to coming from community college is that you've already been in classes with such a diverse like student body and people that have come from such a like so many different like walks of life and life experience. And I think that was really noticeable in classes. When I was going to have a group project, I wanted to work with other transfer students. they were the best team players. They were the people that knew how to work with the team. They knew how to communicate, and they were less competitive. Like there was that. So I loved working with other transfer students, and I think that there's a huge advantage to that, like the collaborative skills that you already come with.
That's fascinating about what you're saying about the competitiveness and stuff. Like I had never thought of that. And you're so right. I mean, when I think about where I came from and how competitive it was and how much easier it is to get students to collaborate from my perspective as a faculty member at a community college now. Yeah, it's widely different. So yeah, thank you for that. I had never really put two and two together about it like that before. Thank you.
Are there other questions for our panelists? Well, while they're thinking, I have one for you. You've spoken, you've kind of touched on the idea of transferring and some of the challenges that all of you faced. What was the hardest thing about transferring from the community college to your to UC Davis or to UC Berkeley? And how did you overcome that? I mean, besides the professors and having access to them, was there, what else was challenging about that?
I think I felt a little bit of pressure at first to like hit the ground running. That one of the disadvantages to transferring is that you don't have the 2 years that everyone else has had on campus. So as soon as I like transferred in my first semester, I was like committed to like, I'm not just gonna like have one semester to like ease into it. And I'm actually so glad I did that, because that was my only in-person semester. So I was like in an undergraduate research lab. I did a decal, I did a bagpipes decal. I joined like figure skating. I just like joined as much as I could. And I'm really glad I did that, because I didn't know it at the time, but that was my only shot at getting to do things in person on campus, was that one semester. And even though I was like super busy and involved in a bunch of stuff, it was totally worth it. But I think just like the pressure at first of like, I need to make it count. And in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that.
I would say that first semester of transferring was really rough in a number of ways. One, you're usually, as a transfer student, starting with your upper division coursework. So I think I had a little bit of an identity crisis starting off, in that there is that like lack of 2 years there. So a lot of the students have already met, a lot of folks have formed groups and things. And I don't know about you, Nikki or Ella, but I was very fortunate to make a lot of wonderful friends at Cosumnes, but we all transferred to different places. So I felt very alone starting off, and like trying to settle into this routine and get professors to know me, where other students have had a couple years of taking introductory 100 level courses. I think that was hitting the ground running. But I think being a transfer student, you do have the skill set. It's just a little bit of a hard walk.
Yeah, Marcos, Ella and I actually met at CRC, and we've been friends since. So I think my biggest challenge was more of the social aspect of it, because, freshmen in college, they have the more like social time, they're in dorms, or they're taking lower division classes, so they're not as intensive, and they have a lot of time to socialize, where, you start as a junior at an R1 institute, and you say, I want to get out of here in 2 years, so I have to put in this work and I need to put it in now. And so yeah, it was very much hitting the ground running, going into Davis, and then also missing that social aspect where I didn't really know anybody, and having to juggle both this like social academic type of situation. It was a lot in the first quarter, but it definitely eases after that. Once you find your rhythm and you find your community, there's a lot of community at these universities. So after that first semester or quarter, in Davis's case, it's a little easier.
How did you all get to know your professors besides knocking on their door, Nikki, and getting feedback and saying, I'm not going to talk to your grad student?
That was kind of the only way to get into like Dr. Erikin's office, you have to go through his lab. So I knew where the lab was. I opened the door and I walked to the back and I said, hey, want to be in your lab. I also had a lot of grad students as TAs, and they would sort of pitch their labs, or they'd be like, oh, I do experimental archaeology. If you're interested and if you want, extra credits, or if you want to put something on your CV, come see me after class. So you have to be a little diligent and really put yourself out there and talk to people, because then they're like, oh, I know Nikki's face. She came and talked to me. That, that quality, I might need that. So let me give her a chance in my lab. But yeah, it was very much like going into office hours and really not just pitching yourself, just ask questions. I know Tim Weaver is at UC Davis. I had walked into his office the first week of class and just introduced myself and sat down and said, I'm a transfer student and I can't wait to learn from you. Can't wait to take one of your classes. I'm not in one yet, but I can't wait. So it's a lot of putting yourself out there, unfortunately and fortunately.
Yeah, office hours. Professors have to have them. Oftentimes, they'll just do other work or check their emails or things like that. So just consistently going in and bothering professors during office hours. And the more you do it, the more they'll remember your face. They'll eventually remember your name. And then there's a lot of, hey, you've been around a lot and you seem to enjoy this class. Would you be interested in doing X, Y, or Z?
And for our current students, I'm just going to jump in and say it's not bothering. It's not bothering us to come see us. Nikki, sorry.
No, you're okay. I also wanted to add that a lot of the opportunities that have come my way are ones that I have not actually intentionally sought out. I've gotten emails from professors like, hey, I remember you talked about really liking this. I actually have this project. Would you be interested in working on it? A lot of job opportunities that are like, hey, I think we're hiring. I remember you. Would you like to apply? So the more you put yourself out there, the more opportunities start coming your way. In my experience is what I've noticed.
I think also if you're extra shy or just like feeling worried about it, you can use the buddy system. I don't consider myself shy, but I do think one of my weaknesses is like not coming up with questions when I just want to talk. So I would befriend the person who was the question asker in class, and sometimes not even like intentionally, but I would end up befriending the person that was always raising their hand, always staying after class. And then I would just buddy system with them. So I would also get to be there for when the questions are being asked. And then I could come up with questions to like ask that are bouncing off of their questions. So they were doing a little bit of the intro work, but that can also help too.
Is that how you picked Nikki?
Nikki picked me.
No, that is very true.
No, but that's for several other classes. I don't know how it happens, but I'll just sit next to someone who ends up being that person that's like, and I'm like, this is great.
It sounds like the theme throughout all of your answer was you need to have confidence. And if you don't have confidence, you kind of fake it until you make it. And that's how you get known around campus. Yeah, that's great. Does anybody who's watching have any questions for our panelists? They're a wealth of wisdom. And they have certainly made Cosumnes River College Anthropology very proud of all of you. You guys have really, you are doing great things, and we know that you are going to keep it up no matter where you land. We are all so proud of you, and you represent CRC very well. So go Hawks. We thank you for joining us today for Anthro Stories. And I think I have a slide I'm supposed to share with you, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you instead. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at CRC Anthro. And you can also find us online at the CRC website. Just go to crc.losrios.edu/anthropology. And we look forward to seeing you in a class or at another event soon. And thank you again, Nikki, Ella, and Marcos for coming and talking to us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.